Welcome to Theory of Pets. I'm a passionate pet owner with a drive to help others like me uncover the truth about the pet industry and what goes on behind the scenes. A few years ago, my husband and I ran into an issue that we had never experienced before. We had lost a pet, a boxer that we had unexpectedly, and we live in Maine, which gets very cold and lots of snow in the wintertime. This happened in February, and the ground was frozen. There was a few feet of snow on top of the ground. There was no way to bury our pet. We live out in a very rural area. We have a large plot of land that our home is on. We've always buried our dogs, and we weren't really sure what to do. Unfortunately, we hadn't thought about this in advance. Neither one of us knew anything about pet cremation, and we ended up having to discuss our options with our veterinarian. We have a wonderful vet who we trust very, very much. She has always been very wonderful. She's treated many dogs of ours. We've known her for decades now, and so we trusted her judgment on that. But at the same time, our veterinarian worked with one pet cremation facility, so that was kind of our only option unless we wanted to look into things ourselves. We struggled with this because it's a time when you're already going through so much and the emotions are overwhelming from losing your pet. The last thing that you want to do is add more to your plate to have to do some research and find out about cremation, what cremation is, what places, what crematories are available in your area. So I wanted to take the time today, even though I know this is kind of a terrible topic that nobody really wants to discuss in advance. I really wanted to take the time today to shine a light on this topic and to remind everyone that's listening that, it's really important for you to take the time to prepare your plans in advance. Much like we do for ourselves and our human families, it's really important to make some plans ahead of time. If your plan A is to bury your pet, which ours has always been, make sure that you have a backup plan. What happens if you can't bury your pet? What happens if something comes up? It's an inappropriate time of the year, or maybe, you move somewhere with a homeowners association that doesn't allow it, or you move somewhere where it's against city ordinances. There's lots of reasons why you might not be able to bury your pet, and cremation is another option for pet owners. It's something that I feel like a lot of the pet parent community isn't educated about. There are options when it comes to cremation, and I know, as I mentioned, this is a morbid topic that nobody wants to discuss, but I took the time today to speak with Mark Lux. Mark is the owner of a Paris Pet Crematory, and they are located in Wisconsin. He took the time today to talk to me about cremation, let us know what it is, the process that your pet's body is going to go through. I think for me, that was one of the biggest questions is I had never had any experience with humans or pets. I didn't know even what it was and what options are available for pet owners. So Mark talked to me today about it, and I asked him to just start out by talking a little bit about himself and how he actually got involved in this business.
My name is Mark Lux, and I started Paris Pet Crematory in 2002. So I've been in this business for just over 15 years. I've been married to a veterinarian for 23 years. And what got me started in this actually was when one of my first pet as an adult, my first dog as an adult passed away. And with my wife being a veterinarian, of course, my dog, his name was Boo Boo, was at her facility, her vet facility, and I asked, well, what are our choices? What are we going to do now? And I believe that it was also in the winter months. We do have quite a bit of acreage, and we had one greyhound already buried there, but that wasn't an option. So she introduced me to the pet cremation. She said, well, we have a company that we work with, and they come by once a week, and they'll pick up the deceased deceased pets, and then in a couple weeks they'll return the cremains. And so that's what we chose to do for our dog. And sure enough, 2 weeks later we received the cremains back. But that really got me thinking about it. I was there one time. I was at her vet hospital one time when the cremation facility came by, and I saw that they had a large box truck, and the back had all these black bags that obviously had pets in them, and it was pretty full, and it just didn't seem like it didn't seem like a pleasing thing for a pet owner. I thought if pet owners really knew that that's how their pet was being transported, that they wouldn't opt for that choice. And then the facility, the cremation facility, the truck left out her driveway and then headed into town, into Kenosha, instead of going the direction where they came from, where they're located at. So I thought that, but then I started connecting dots and saying, well, I get it now. They're driving around to all the vets, picking up all these pets, and then at the end of the day, they head back to where they came from and start their cremations. So that's how I got into it. I thought there must be something, this has to be able to be done better. And so that's what I did. I decided that we wouldn't come around just one time a week, and we would come 2 times a week, so we could pick up the pets and have them returned quicker. Within 4 days, we'd have the cremains returned, and we would hand deliver them. And I remember when my dog was cremated by another facility, they shipped the cremains back to the hospital through UPS, and I remember opening the box, and there were these packaging peanuts, and then this tin inside that had the cremains. So I didn't want to do that. I thought shipping the cremains was not really a good option. I just thought it was a little disrespectful. So we implemented that we would hand deliver them, and they would not be in a shipping box. They were in a rope handled bag. So there's just things like that I decided that we would do that would be more that a pet owner would want, like myself, where you're not waiting so long to get your pet's cremains back. It could happen a lot quicker, and therefore you could get some closure quicker than 2 weeks later after you thought about, you think about your dog a little bit, but you're starting to get over the pain, and then all of a sudden here comes this package, and it's your pet's cremains, and then it just starts everything all over again. So that's why I started it, and the pet cremation business, and we wanted to do things different. I didn't want to be an industrialized facility that had multiple cremation units with a bunch of employees and a bunch of trucks running all over the state, which seems to be how a lot of cremation facilities operate in my area. And so that's what we did, and we've been, over the 15 years, I would say that what I have noticed is, in the beginning when I started, it seemed that veterinarians were more interested in the service aspect of it. How we came to the hospital twice a week, and how we had uniformed personnel, and we drove a nice vehicle. I didn't have a big box truck. I thought that just didn't seem right. There seemed like there needed to be some type of transportation for pets that could be a little more dignified than that. So we purchased a Mercedes Sprinter van, which I thought was, had the class to it, maybe more like a funeral home would have for a relative that passed. So we did that, and then I would say probably maybe in the past 10 years I've noticed that veterinarians are starting to get away from concerning themselves with the service of the cremation facility, but more with the cost of it, and the cost being low. So we would have some customers that maybe would be 30 minutes away from us, and then they would switch to a cremation facility that would be 2.5 hours away from them, just because the price was, half the price. Things that I thought was amazing, that somebody could actually do the cremation for I think that is important to pet owners is they need to pay attention to that. I've noticed with the veterinarians, they used to be run by the veterinarian themselves would own the practice and maybe have a couple other veterinarians that are partners with them with the practice, and it's really picking up steam now. But a lot of them in the past 10 years, I would say, are starting to be purchased by corporations that own many vet hospitals across the country or in North America. And so I relate that to the fact why they're looking for a low-cost cremation is the fact that they're going to be selling their business and they want to maximize their selling, the amount they get for selling their practice. So they want their books to look good, and they're looking for less expensive cremation.
Yeah, you and I had talked briefly before the interview too, and I told you that I had one experience with pet cremation, and I think you're right. To me, and I had mentioned to you that, we've worked with the same vet for many, many years, a couple of decades now, and she's a wonderful woman, and it's a small vet clinic. She's the only vet there. She hires some wonderful techs that really care for your animals. We've had animals put to sleep there, and our veterinarian and her staff are in tears because they've seen these animals for many, many years, and they love them too. And, we are very connected to her, and I trusted her when she recommended the place for us to have our pet cremated, and so I trusted that she would choose a place that would care for the animals the way that she cares for them in her vet practice. And we had a lovely, wonderful experience. Obviously, you never want to have to do it, but when it is time to do it, you want to make sure, like you said, that they're not just picking up your dog and throwing them in a box truck and mailing the remains back to you in a couple of weeks. That's very impersonal. I think you had a great point when you mentioned that you've had those 2 weeks and you kind of have had some time to wrap your mind around it and process it a little, and you're starting to feel a little better, and then all of a sudden the UPS man shows up with your package, and it just makes everything so much harder all over again. So, I think you had some good points. Now that obviously I'm working in the pet industry and I've learned some more about it, I think, and it's not just the pet industry, everything in our society now, but a lot of people are looking for just price cost. It has to be as low as possible to make as much of a profit as possible. And I think when it comes to something like, obviously, veterinary care for sure, but and cremation as well, maybe spending a little bit more, but you're getting a better experience. It's making you feel better in a time that you're feeling really down and devastated. If you can have somebody that seems like they really care about your pet and your loss, that makes a world of difference.
Yes, it does make a difference, and we like to partner ourselves with veterinary hospitals that are well run, that look nice, that are clean, that have good staff, that have good Google reviews and that kind of thing. We like to partner with those types of people, and we always know a good veterinary hospital when they want to come and visit our facility, because for as long as I've been doing this, very few veterinarians want to come and even, see where they're sending the pets to, what type of facility, does it have enough equipment to operate, that kind of thing, just to get a feeling for the setting. You would think that it would be more important to some veterinarians, but it's not. But let me tell you this, though. The veterinarians, when they go to I don't know what their syllabus is nowadays in vet school, but when my wife went to school, they didn't teach them anything about cremation. They knew nothing about cremation, and she knew nothing about cremation. She knew this facility came. There were 3 options for you. They had an urn book where you could choose an urn, and they knew that the pet would be shipped back to them in 2 days, and that was really the standard for the area for many, many years. Now you're seeing that the pet cremation industry is growing just like the human cremation is growing. There's, from what the information Cremation, we looked up, we found out that there's 800 pet crematories in North America. So it's growing on both sides. But when I started getting into the business and understanding it and telling her, like you said about the third option or the second option, you didn't know what it was. I'm going to guess that you were probably talking about what we here at Paris call a partitioned cremation. Across the country, they're called different things, and even in the same state, they call them different things. They might call it an individual cremation, a separate cremation. We even have a competitor not far from us that calls it a private cremation when there is more than one pet in the cremation chamber. They consider the word private meaning, well, you're getting your cremains back. That doesn't. They say it doesn't have, need to be just your pet in the cremation chamber. So when you start to look into and if you did research, even across the country on pet cremations and looked at their definitions, you would see that there's not a standard, and they're all over. The terminology is what they call them. Some of them even might avoid calling them anything and call them a package, the sunset package or the rainbow bridge package or something to that effect. But one thing that I think it's important for all of your listeners to understand is the terminology and the vagueness. It's been very frustrating for us in this business when we look around and see a lot of competitors that don't explain what they're doing or on their cremation forms that the client themselves will read and sign, add an emotional time on top of it, are vague. They might use words like privately placed within a compartment in the cremation chamber. And truly, what does that mean? Privately placed within a compartment in the cremation chamber. These cremation chambers do not have compartments in them, and most of the pet cremation businesses we use the same retort, which is a cremation unit. We use the same retort that a funeral home would use for human cremation. It's the same size, and if you want to envision the inside of it, it's really just slightly larger than a coffin is. And the only thing different in the pet industry, instead of having one burner in the retort that they use for humans that would come down on the chest cavity of a human, in pets we use two burners in the cremation chamber on the ceiling. And the reason for that is in the pet cremation industry, they will do things such as the partition or the separated or segregated or whatever the term they want to use, but that's when there is more than one pet in the cremation chamber during cremation, which of course is more efficient because you're getting more done in the same amount of time. And it can be done where you can place metal barriers or fire brick or just space itself if you keep the pets spaced far enough apart, where you can do multiple cremations in the cremation chamber and still retrieve each pet's ashes, or cremains in the industry, they're called cremains. You can still retrieve each pet's back and return them to the owner. Maybe I should touch on cremation a little bit. These retorts for cremation are very much like humans, and the temperatures reach the same. Here in Wisconsin, we have to run ours at 1,600 degrees Fahrenheit, and cremation usually, in some states, you can set the temperatures lower or they require it to be higher. But don't be confused if the temperature's higher, let's say 1,700 degrees, that doesn't necessarily mean the cremation happens faster, because when you're, just like with any business, if you're a baker, for instance, the more cakes you can make in a day and sell, the more profit you would have. So, of course, all cremation facilities would want to move as fast as they possibly could. So we would always want to turn our temperature to the highest if that actually helped get the cremation done quicker. But that it actually does not. So, and then when it comes cremation, it's the high temperatures that are removing all the moisture from the body and reducing it down to just its skeleton. Even the bone marrow is gone, so the bones are hollow and they're very fragile, and they're also very sharp. As they break, the pieces are sharp. So we would sweep out the cremains of a pet, and by sweeping them out, we have a brush, a tool that reaches in there so you can keep yourself away from the heat. And then you sweep them toward the front, and there's a pan in the front. As you sweep them over the edge of the cremation floor, there's a chute that leads to a pan at the bottom of the unit, and all the cremains go into this pan. And then you take the pan out. Of course, there should be some identification with the cremation. We will hang the identification. It's a cremation form. We hang that on the outside of the cremation of the retort during the cremation. And we also have a log that we write what we're doing, what pet it is, how much it weighed, the temperature, the time that we started the cremation, the time the cremation ends. We keep a very detailed log of everything that we're doing that way, and we don't have to. There's no regulation to do that. There's no regulations at all. And then we take the cremains out, take the tag with it, and it follows it over to the processing station. And once again, it's just like for humans. These bones are sharp and they're jagged, and they would be too large to put into an urn. You'd have to have, an awkward, odd-sized urn. And so you put them in this. It's basically like a commercial blender that breaks down the bone fragments into even smaller pieces, similar to a sand consistency of sand. A lot of people, think it's ash and refer to them as, I'm getting my pet's ashes back. But if you were to, let's say, open your bag of cremains and try to blow them, they wouldn't blow like up into the air like ash does, because it's really bone fragment, not ash. The heat and the process just removes the ash and burns it away and out the top of the stack. And most good retorts should not have smoke coming out of the top, because that would mean that smoke would be particles. And in a true cremation, you don't want any particles, so you want to make sure that the temperature is high enough and everything's being burned, so there's should be no smoke coming out of the top. I know I'm kind of jumping around there, but that's how the process works, and that's the temperature that it's at. And let me go back to the part where I said there's no regulations. There are no regulations, so what I just told you, what we do, may not be what the guy down the street does, or somebody in Maine might do, or somebody in Arizona. And there are, from what we have found, there's 3 states that have some type of regulation or law, but they don't have anybody overseeing it. There's not like some type of regulator, like for a farm even, because you're dealing with food that humans will consume. You have I don't know if it's the FDA or who gets involved. I know out here where we live, they do have these inspectors come by, because a couple farms were not in very good shape, and they were reported, and they ended up being in the news. But there's nobody that comes by and checks on you to see if you're doing things correctly. And my belief is, even these states, New York and Arizona, they probably have no, the governments aren't going to spend money to have somebody drive around to the crematories and make sure they're, looking at their logs and make sure they're doing everything correct. So that's probably the biggest thing, and something that I would emphasize to your listeners is to pay attention to that fact, that even well, for instance, Maine, you don't have any regulations or rules or that sort of thing. And even if you did, for instance, I don't know if you can recall, but there was somebody, I believe it was in Georgia, for human cremations. They weren't even being inspected, and when you do human cremations, there's a lot more rules involved and a lot more paperwork. And that person there, his equipment broke down, and so he was just hiding the bodies on his property until he finally, until somebody figured that out and caught them. So that's something that I would always keep in mind, is that, whatever you read or whatever you see, I think the best thing for pet owners when it comes to the cremation of their pet, if they really love their pet and it's part of the family, like most pets are nowadays with families, they are one of the family. But my recommendation would be to definitely do your own research on that, and to visit the cremation facility. A lot of people don't do that. They don't look into it, and they have developed this relationship with their veterinarian, and then they trust their veterinarian to handle the cremation for them. And I'm not saying that you cannot trust your veterinarian to do that, but I'm saying you definitely cannot trust all of your veterinarians to do that, because they don't. That's not their thing. They're not that concerned. As long as the bodies are removed from the hospital and cremains are returned to the hospital, and that's really what's the most important thing for them after they leave, and how they're handled or what's done. As long as there's no complaints, like a client saw a pet being thrown in the back of the truck or something like that, as long as they don't have any reason to switch from the facility, then they're not going to do that. But I would definitely, like I said, I would research it, look, and try to go to the facility. We had a customer here that came here to our place, that he was 30 minutes away. His hospital was 30 minutes away, and they used a crematory that was 2.5 hours away from the hospital. And he found out who they were using, and then he questioned himself, why are they using somebody 2.5 hours away? And he told me that when he came here, I don't know why they're using a place that's 2.5 hours away when you're just 30 minutes away. And so some people are figuring it out on their own, because my opinion would be for veterinarians to try to use a cremation facility that's closer or local to them. Similar to humans, for instance, if you had a relative that died, and I've had one that died, and it was at the hospital, and it's up to you to make the arrangements for what funeral home you want to handle the service for you. And then you call the funeral home, and then they go to the hospital and pick up the body, take it to the funeral home, do the embalming or whatever you've requested, and they handle the whole service for you. And even after the service, they transport the body to the cemetery. And if you have chosen cremation and they have a retort on site, they'll do the cremation there for you. Or they'll tell you, they should tell you where they're taking your relative for cremation. But we did a burial, and they handled the whole thing. They picked up the body from the hospital, then brought it to the brought it to the funeral home, and then took it to the cemetery. But when it comes to pets, in a lot of places throughout the states, that's not how it's handled. The veterinarian doesn't hand you a referral card of three crematories in the area here. Why don't you call, make the arrangements? They don't do that. They really are the middleman, and often they're adding fees in there for being the middleman, and they're choosing the cremation facility for you, which I just find that to be kind of strange nowadays. It's 2018, and I would have thought that by now that it would have taken a turn where it would be more of a referral service, where people would either take the pet to the crematory themselves or have the crematory come to their hospital and do a pickup. One thing, though, that I bet a lot of your listeners, I bet they fall into this category, is that they don't want to think about cremation. They don't want to think about the death of their pet, and they don't. They avoid it. And then when the pet does pass away, they're really not sure the questions even to ask. And that's when the vet tech or the veterinarian gets involved and says, oh, we have a place that'll pick them up and do the cremation, and they comfort you that way, and then you're fine. We've been to the Pet Expo here at the State Fairgrounds in Wisconsin we have the beautiful backdrop of a big Afghan dog there. Just it's gorgeous, and then we have our logo there that reads. My logo has the word Paris in big letters, and then in smaller letters under it says Pet Crematory. And as people walk by our table, we would have brochures and pens and things like that for them to pick up, and some people would be reading the logo and start reaching for the brochure or the pen or something, and they'd just see the smaller print Pet Crematory, and their faces would wrinkle up. They'd make these faces and and then turn away and start walk away. Now here you're at a pet expo that's going to have everything for pets, from dog foods and treats to leashes and everything under the sun, but you don't want to think about pet cremation. You want to avoid it. Here's your opportunity to learn, to ask somebody some questions that's in the industry, and many of these people just want to walk right by and kick that can down the road because they can't handle it or don't want to think about it, and they're really doing a disservice when you wait to the end and then don't even make the call for yourself. You're letting your veterinarian make that decision, and once again, some veterinarians may be making a good decision for them, but they're not educated in cremation and what it should be like or what it should be about and how it should be handled, and some of them are getting some type of rebate from the cremation facility or some kind of kickback. A lot of cremation facilities will do the hospital employees' pets for free, and have giveaways and that kind of thing to keep their relationship going with the veterinarian. That's something that I've never believe in. On occasion, if we have a good relationship with somebody, or if I have a special relationship with a doctor or something like that, we would do that. But for the most part, when you give something away free, then somebody else has to pay for it, and so we just normally don't do that.
I agree, and I think when you mentioned that, a lot of pet owners, I don't think it's necessarily that they don't want to learn and know enough to make the best choice for their pet, but I think you just don't want to think about losing your pet and how you're going to deal with that. And it's just the same, like you said, with our loved ones. You don't want to think about that either. But once we get to a certain point in our lives, we start to think about what is going to happen to us, and we try to make arrangements for ourselves so our family doesn't have to deal with it. And obviously our pets can't do that. I fell into the category of the person who, we've always buried dogs. We live out in the country. We don't have a homeowners association. We have a lot of land. I never thought that we wouldn't be able to bury a pet until we lost a dog in the wintertime and the ground was frozen and we couldn't bury. And I certainly was one of those people that I didn't realize. I always knew cremation was an option. I didn't know there were so many options, so many choices. I didn't really know what it was. I obviously knew about cremation for humans, but I didn't have a lot of information. And when you get to that point and your pet is gone, you don't have a couple of weeks to do some research, ask questions, call different facilities, make a decision. You need to make a decision very quickly. So I think, as you pointed out, it's really great for pet owners. It's a sad thing to think about, but the best thing that you can do to prepare yourself and make things as easy for yourself as possible is to take the time, do the research in advance. Do it when your dog or your cat is young. Don't think when they're older that you have to think about it and stew on it, and it's just depressing. Do it when you get your puppy or your kitten, and you don't have to think about the sadness. It's just something that you have the information about and the knowledge, and when that time comes, you'll be prepared. But I certainly fell into that category. I learned a lot very quickly, but at the same time, we had just lost our dog who we had had for 13 years. We were devastated. It was such a hard time. And now, as we're going through all of that hard emotions, and all of the hard times, surrounding the death of our pet, we also have to do all of this research and try to make the best decision and figure this stuff out. And it would have actually made it easier on myself and my husband if we had known all of that in advance. So I can't stress enough how important that is. And I think, for you talking about going to pet expos and things like that, people don't realize that the information, the resources, they're out there. It's just taking the time, and nobody wants to do it, but it is going to be better in the long run if you take the time to do it before you need it.
Absolutely. Another thing with that, like you say, ahead of time, thinking of these things ahead of time. When they get pets, maybe their first pet may not go down that way, but normally when you get pets, I've had quite a few pets now in my adult life, and we already know how long that breed's going to live. So we have an idea, okay, we have a dog named Squirt, and we're like, okay, Squirt's a little Jack Russell Terrier, and we know about how old she's going to live to, and so you start to plan for that. We have another dog, we know how old they're going to live, and in my opinion, people know that when their pet's going to die. A cat's a little trickier, though. They can live quite a long time, or they can live a short time, but they're a little bit trickier. But yes, people don't do anything, and then when they come here at their pet has passed away, and now they're coming here, and they're a little scrambled on what they want to do, and then you'll have people that will want a paw print or a paw casting of their pet, and maybe they want a fur clipping or something like that, and we will do that for customers, but it just always amazed me, like, why wouldn't you just do the paw print while your pet's alive? It'd be a lot easier where they're standing right there. You can do it with them and go, hey, I'm going to have this, even when they're little or middle-aged or getting older. But they're not. I mean, here's a time where you can do a momentum, and your dog can even be alive, and you can have fun doing it together and have that. It's not done, but for whatever reason, after death of your pet, now people want the paw print, or they want these mementos to remember their pet by, even though they may have pictures throughout the pet's life. But yes, a lot of people don't do that, don't think about it, and then in the end, I think some people might get frustrated or be a little disappointed because they didn't get what they want, or they didn't even know what they wanted. And you'll see some people that will leave poor reviews on different companies, and sometimes I'll read the reviews and think, that's really unfair. That's really on you. You didn't know what to ask or what to look for or what you want, and people don't. But Samantha, before we get too far here, I think we need to answer the question that everybody has, and that's, how do I know I get my pet's cremains back? That's a huge question. That's
absolutely
probably number one in the industry, and it's a great question, and you can be bamboozled very easily by different wording or different suggestions and that sort of thing, and I'll give you some examples for that that your listeners should pay attention to. And for instance, they have this identification disc that they use. It's a stainless steel disc. It might have the crematory's name on it. It might have a number on it, identification number. The vet might have it in his office, and then after the euthanasia, they may take this disc and take maybe a zip tie and attach it to the pet's leg, or maybe to the cadaver bag of the pet, and you'll see that. And now everybody's got their smartphones. They might take a picture of it, and my dog is number 213, and then when they get the cremains back, they'll get their cremains, and they'll have the disc there that looks like it had been through a fire, and they feel very comfortable. Boom, I did it. I got my pet's cremains back. But I just want to tell you that is no determination that you did get your pet back. It's a procedure we do not use because I believe that it can be easily fooled. You can take all And I don't mean to speak ill of the industry. I just want everybody to pay attention and understand what happens and what can happen.
Sure.
Because we are so unregulated that greed definitely gets in the way of some of the operators, and it's about the money and not really about doing things ethically. But with that said, back to the ID disc. The ID discs can be removed at the cremation facility and placed in the front of the cremation chamber and go through the fire and look burnt and come back and not be shiny stainless steel anymore, but be of a darker color. And then you can go ahead and put 213 with the dog that you picked up from that hospital. Go ahead and put it with some cremains and send it back to the hospital. So you can easily be fooled by the discs. So don't believe in that. There is probably only two ways that you can be assured that you're getting your pet's cremains back, and that also goes with like your veterinarian, for instance, that you trust and you've known for a long time. That's great. I mean, we have veterinarians that really trust us, that have been here. We do their pets for whatever. But to be honest with you, the only possible way you would know that you are getting your pet back are two things. One, you were there and you witnessed the cremation, or two, you had a video recording of the cremation. I guess there could be three. You could have a webcasting of the procedure where you're not there, but you're somewhere else in the world and you were watching it. But I think those are the best and only ways that you can truly be sure that you have get your pet's cremains back, because everything else can be fooled, and there's could be some trickery involved, and hey, humans make mistakes. They could have a new operator that hasn't been trained correctly, or doesn't have somebody watching that person or paying attention, make sure things aren't getting switched up. One thing we try to do here to avoid that kind of thing is we have video cameras, and to watch our units. We have one on each of our units, and the camera on each one, so we're able to see exactly what we're doing. And if there were any question like, whoa, this size, we're getting too many cremains for this little dog or something like that, it doesn't happen. I can't remember the last time anything like that happened. But anyway, we do have the video that we can go back on and look and go, oh, okay, hey, here's where you just made this switch, put this back, and everything's fine. So those are good things to have in place to keep them from happening. I think maybe another thing that would be important for pet owners is if they were aware of what their cremains should look like, and maybe how much cremains they should get back for their pet, because nobody knows that, right?
Right. I certainly don't.
Right. Nobody knows how many cremains they should get back for the weight of their pet. And there's a lot of different factors on that. Of course, the breed and the bone size, and we'll get people that will have to bring in a little dog. It doesn't have to be little. It could be a big dog, but it's way overweight, and so let's say the dog should be 70 pounds, but it's 110 pounds, and then they will question, like, hey, he was 110 pounds. It just doesn't seem like enough cremains. Well, that fat does not turn into cremains or ash or anything like that. You're not getting into the fat back. So if your pet is overweight, that doesn't mean that if you have a 70-pound lab and a 110-pound lab, that doesn't mean 110-pound necessarily the cremains are going to weigh that much more than the 70-pound. But I have some information here that I thought might be interesting, and I'll just run through it real quick, and it'll give you kind of an idea of how much the cremain should weigh after cremation. So we have a pet here that's 17 pounds, and the weight of the cremains is 0.43 pounds. Then we have another one here, let's say 26 pounds. 26 pounds, it's 0.81 pounds of cremains. A 43-pound Beagle mix, 1.049 pounds of cremains. We have a 55-pound dog. We have 2.55 pounds of cremains. 57-pound. we get 2.63 pounds of cremains. Here's an 83-pound pet. It's a greyhound, and 83 pounds. We have 3.33 pounds of cremains remaining. We have a 103-pound Great Dane, and we're getting 4.36 pounds of cremains back. And then here we have a 107-pound boxer. It's the big boxer, and we have 2.8 pounds of cremains on that. So that's kind of interesting. There, you look at the boxer, and you're going to say that boxer, or let's say if we're looking at the Great Dane, he has a bigger bone structure. They have bigger, thicker bones, so it weighed less than the boxer, but it had more cremains going back. So those are some interesting numbers, because what I'm finding a lot of times when we have people that will bring their pet here, and sometimes we'll have people that have come from different states, they moved into the area, so they could be people from the area or people from other states. They will bring me their pet, and a lot of times they got a utility container from their vet. They went through their vet for the cremation, and they got a utility container, which could be a tin or a plastic box or something like that, and they'll want to put their pet have me put them into an urn, and so we'll ask the breed or the weight or something like that of the pet, so we can get an idea of what size urn we'll need. And what I have found often is that the people are getting more cremains back than I in my opinion, I believe that they should be getting back. And we won't say anything because we don't want to upset anybody, but we'll have people come in and let's say that it'll be a Cocker Spaniel or a smaller dog even than that, and we know, that goes in a smaller, and we can always get it in our small country woods urn, and then we're trying to do that and we can't do it. We have to go to the next size up. So I find that to be very interesting, that some of these pet owners with their pets are getting more cremains back than they should. So that's something that you should look for. Another thing with cremains, cremains should be whitish, beige color in most cases. Of course, it depends on what the pet is eating. I've never owned a ferret, but I noticed from cremating ferrets that they must have maybe a high iron content diet. I'm not sure, but I do know that their bones are more of a rusty color. So that does vary a little bit, but for the most part, for cats and dogs, their cremains should be kind of an ivory or a beige color, and that would be consistent with a completed cremation versus anything that's black or gray. When you start to see black or gray cremains, then you are seeing a cremation that has not completed. It might be, I don't know if you said you're an outdoor person, so you probably have had campfires before, but with a campfire, if you let's say you got a campfire going, and then maybe it'll rain, or maybe your wood wasn't dry enough or whatever, and the fire will stop, and that you're going to see a lot of black and gray in the pile of wood. But let's say you got a really good fire burn though, and then you all call it a night and come back the next day, and you'll see that it's like white. Everything's turned to ash, and it's really white, and it's not dark. That's very similar with the cremation of a body, is that the complete cremation will, if you have gray or black, that's still particles that haven't been completely burned. So you would want to look for that beige color in most cases. The only time that maybe something like that doesn't happen is if you were to pick one of those cremations where it's more than one pet in the cremation chamber. As we talked about it earlier, they might call it separate or individual or partitioned, or some places even do give it the misnomer of private, where you would think it would be just your pet, but it may not be just your pet. And the reason for that is there might be a pet that might be in the back corner of the cremation chamber, and the burner and the flame is not getting to it very well, and so that might be a cause for it where it didn't complete its cremation. But if we have those types of cremations, we like to take that specific pets cremains there, and as we sweep them out, we'll put them back in the cremation chamber under the burner and finish the cremation. Another reason that you might get some discoloration is if somebody had there's been times where we've had people exhume bodies and bring them to us for cremation because maybe they're moving and they wanted to take their pet with them. And then we had an instance up here in Wisconsin, just outside of Milwaukee. There was a pet cemetery that closed down, and it was actually they actually had Jane Mansfield's dog buried there. That's a interesting tidbit of information. But they closed down, and people were looking for options. What do they do with their body? These pets, so they were exhuming them and bringing them to us for cremation. So in that instance, we have done that before.
Wow.
Yeah, it is wow.
Wow.
It is wow, and we don't like doing that. It's not pleasant on our end at all. But because, and I'm talking about the pets from the cemetery, because
right.
they're usually in a container that is fiberglass or plastic or something like that, and it took on some water over time, and it's just not pleasant. Other people, homeowners that have buried their pet, a lot of times that works out okay, but we always tell people that when we do that, I think it may even be on our website, that when you get those cremains back, they're often going to be a darker color. They're going to be kind of a darker sandy brown color, not really the beige, but darker than that. And I don't know, I'm definitely not educated in that area, so I don't know what that's caused from. If from being in the ground for a while, I don't know. And we'll often tell them too that you may get more cremains back than normal. We might give you larger containers back because some of it will be earth that is in with the body too, and when you burn ground, at least Wisconsin ground, it's a brown color when you're done, and it does remove all the moisture from it, so it is more of an ash. But we will have that mixed in with the cremains, and it's too time consuming to try to pick every little bone out, so we'll just use a couple containers maybe instead of one single urn for that pet. So those are things that it's interesting, and it can be done. So if there's listeners that have their pet buried, they could still do that. I would check with the crematory first. We like people to call and give us a heads up because we want to be able to do that cremation as soon as they get here. It just works out better for us if that's how that happens. So that's a possibility.
Yeah, absolutely. That's understandable. I would definitely encourage people to call ahead first and make sure they can get you right in. And just as a curiosity question, so I know you mentioned that the units that you use are about a little bit bigger than a coffin. They're the same ones they use for humans. So people that you mentioned ferrets and smaller pets, and of course we know cats and dogs. Can you have larger pets cremated, like a horse, for example?
Our unit would not be large enough for a horse. There might be some people that would want to dismember the horse to do that, but I certainly would never do that. So we're not set up for a horse. We have been able to help out the locals do with some of their animals. One time we were able to do a lion for them.
Wow.
Yeah, it was really cool. It had a huge paws, just awesome.
Wow, yeah.
But then we had a client that had a horse that had given birth to twins or two babies at one time, and only 1 out of 10,000 of those make it, and they didn't. So we did these little horses, and we have done miniature horses also. We have been able to do some of the goats, and quite a few years ago, there used to be a big craze here in America with these potbelly pigs.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, everybody, oh, I got to get a potbelly pig, and well, they got fooled, and they weren't little miniature potbelly pigs. They turned into be really big pigs, and so we've had to do some of those too, where they'd be over 200 pounds. But I think our limit would probably be about 300 pounds for an animal. And then you also, Samantha, you were asking about costs too. So, and this is certainly going to vary by the type of service that you get, or maybe the area, what region of the country you're in, that kind of thing. But for us, and usually when it comes to cremation of pets, unlike humans, I shouldn't say this because I think with humans, I think there's a set cost, but I know we have a big obesity problem in the country, and these human crematories are having real difficulty cremating these obese cadavers because the fat, you have to remember, really is a fuel, and it's a greasy fuel that causes, what it does is it causes a situation where you can't control the fire. And with cremation, you're basically controlling that fire inside of that retort, and it's important that you do control it, because once you're not controlling it, and the fuel inside's controlling it, that's when you're in trouble. And I know that human crematories, their insurance is going up because more and more of them are catching on fire across the country because of that problem. So I do believe that they're adding fees on for once you reach a certain weight. Over that, they're charging more. But generally in the pet industry, it goes by weight, the weight of the pet, and that's because the more the weight, the longer the cremation takes.
Okay.
So, yeah. So, and everybody breaks it down differently. Some people will go 0 to 20 pounds and in different categories. I don't like to have a bunch of little categories. We've separated it. We go to 35 pounds, and then 75 pounds, and 100 pounds, and 150, and so on. And we start our prices here for a communal cremation, which would be where you would not get any cremains back. They would be spread on site. We have a 3-acre memorial garden here that we spread the cremains of pets that do not go back. Our starting fee for that is $103. And then a private cremation, where it would just be your pet only in a cremation chamber, and that would be up to 35 pounds, is $183. And then we also do offer an attended cremation, where you're here for the cremation, and the fee for that is quite a bit more. It's $333. And let me explain a few things on that. First of all, the communal cremation, a lot of people that do choose that cremation, if they're, let's admit it, we're not all the same. We're not all have the same feelings toward our pets. Some people may have their pet as a working, part of the farm, or a work dog, or a watchdog, or whatever. Their bond is just different than maybe your and my bond might be with our pets. But at the end of the life, they're just looking for an easy disposal of their pet, and so they may choose the communal. And then also there's other people that may not know what they would do with the cremains if they had them back, and maybe they're an older person and they don't want to burden family members of trying to figure out what to do with these cremains, although many people request to have them put in their coffin with them when they're buried. So some people do choose that communal, and some people don't really care what happens to the cremains after a communal cremation. And I should explain for your listeners that the communal cremation would be multiple pets in the cremation chamber on top of one another. There's no form of division of the bodies, and they're all cremated together. And that process usually takes about 5 hours of that cremation. So some people don't care, and they really wouldn't care if their pets' cremains were landfilled, and other people do care what happens to the communal cremations afterwards. And as long as I've been in business, I've never thrown any cremains in the garbage. We've always put them on, spread them back on earth to as their final resting place. We've always done that, and that's one thing that you want to know. For people that do want to do the communal but really like the idea of the memorial garden, is that you would need to ask your crematory, where are they scattering, or how did they dispose of the ashes? Because that's another thing to look for that's very vague. With many crematories, they'll say they have different words they like to use. They'll say a piece of land designated only for the spreading of pet cremains, but they won't give you an address. Or another good trick is cremated remains are spread in a private farm field in southern Wisconsin, but there's no address to these places, and it makes you wonder, is that really the truth, and why can't I get an address? Or because personally, I don't know any farmer that would want to take on a bunch of cremains, because they're not good for the earth if you keep spreading them on the same plot over time, because they have a high sodium content and calcium content. Sometimes during a cremation, you'll see a real bright, kind of almost a fluorescent green, not the fluorescent green like construction workers wear, but like a teal kind of green, and that's calcium after the cremation. Yeah, so what we do is we spread them. We take the cremains and we mix them with a product that neutralizes the high sodium content and calcium, and makes it safer for the environment and safer for the earth. And that's not super necessary to homeowners that are taking them home to spread cremains, unless because they're probably scattering in a lake or by a cabin or something like that. It's not as though they hit the ground and everything around it dies. That's not the case at all. But if you were to keep doing it over the same area over time, yes, you would see that the things would change. The plant life would be different, and it would get to a point where it would not look good. So that is something that we do, and I know there's products out there for people that have either had their pet cremated or a friend or a relative cremated, that they can mix it with this material and then put it in a planter and then plant a tree or some type of plant that they want to remember their loved one with. So that's with the communal cremation. And with the private cremation, we call it a private. I'm not sure we'll often refer to it as a single pet cremation, because of the fact that some people are using private, but it's not really just your pet, and that gets confusing. And I personally wish there was some regulation or some methodology that everybody could get on the same page, so it's not so confusing to pet owners. But at the same time, I believe that's intentional, that it's confusing to pet owners. And also, you heard me mention the attended price, and you probably question, like, wow, that's quite a jump in cost. Well, and we've had that question from different pet owners, that when we give them our prices, they're like, wow, how come that's so much? Then they can start to think that you must be cheating, and now if we want to see that we're certain we're getting our pet back, you're really charging me for it. But that's not the case at all. The real reason is, when it comes to an attended cremation, we have to take the retort and not use it for probably 2 hours prior to the cremation, sometimes longer, because we have to let it cool down. For instance, when I cremate my own pet, I will I'll have the unit very cold, very cool, where I can place his body in there, and then I'll shut the door, and then I'll turn the time up for a little bit longer than it really needs to be, and that's because it's my pet, and I don't want to open it. I don't look. I just let the cremation go, and then I come back later, and then I open the retort door, and then I sweep the cremains out. And that's because I have a bond with that pet, and memories attached to that pet, and I certainly don't want the memory of my dog, on fire.
Of course.
Right, of course, it makes sense. But if you were to bring me your pet, and this is, of course, your pet that I don't know, because I do have friends that bring me their pet that I know, and I'll cry too, because I'm like, oh man, that's so sad. I love that dog too. And so if I know the pet, if I have any relationship with the pet, let's put it this way, I'll often cremate it like I would cremate my own pet. But if I don't know the pet, then I can cremate it like a cremation operator should, where you're cremating the pet, and when that one's done, you place another pet in the cremation chamber, and then when that's done, you just keep going like that. But so I don't do that. So when attendants come, I certainly can't push your pet in there and have them, boom, blow up in flames while you're standing there. That's certainly not what you would expect, and it might frighten you and give you a bad memory. So that unit for our attended cremation, it will sit and it'll be running. It's not sitting off. It'll be running. It has a blower on it that sucks air through it, but no burners are on. So we're trying to cool that unit down. So somebody that wants to do an attended, the reason for that cost being higher is because our unit is sitting, not being used for 2 hours prior to your cremation, and then depending on the length of the cremation, let's say you had a cat, maybe the attended cremation would take up approximately an hour, and then we're going to try to cool the cremains down as fast as we can, so we can sweep them out and process them and then place them in a poly bag. We don't want the poly bag to melt, so we can't have the cremains too hot. And then we'll place them in a velvet bag and then an urn of your choosing, and then you're ready to go home at the same time. So that's really the reason that cremation, the attended cremation, costs more, is because we have that loss of production, and we're still running the unit where we're trying to cool it down. I think one other thing that I want to mention, one thing I would say to your listeners and anybody that's really they consider their pet to be a family member and they want to do the best things they can do for them, is to certainly do your research on your own. Visit the crematory. You don't have to. You could set up a specific appointment for it, or maybe you're in the area or you're out that way where the crematory is. You give them a call and say, hey, can I stop in? I think that's a good idea for people, because you should meet the people that are going to be handling this for you and get a feel for them. Can you trust them? Are they kind of creepy? Or are they upselling you constantly? Those kinds of things I think you should look for. And you should also look for some of the things we would call red flags would be the intentional vagueness on websites concerning the pet cremation procedure. I don't think there's anything that should be hidden, really. There's some things are not pleasant, and not everybody can handle it. Kind of like maybe like those warnings when if you get some music, it has that explicit lyrics logo on it, or if you're listening to radio, they're going to start talking about something that might be a little not pleasant for everybody. They'll warn you and give you a heads up so you can remove your children from the room or whatever. But for the most part, I don't think we should be hiding anything. So any cremation facility you talk to should be very transparent and be willing to tell you anything about the step, and not trying to hide anything or talk you out of some question you're asking. I think another thing that's important is, if your veterinarian did choose the cremation facility for you, I would always concern myself with the distance it is from the vet hospital. We're in a very populated area here between Chicago and Milwaukee, and there's I don't know, there's maybe 5 or 6 crematories here, and I just think it's always suspect when your veterinarian is sending your pet, where they, you got to drive by 3 crematories to get to the one that they're sending it to them. There's got to be some kind of reason for that distance, and that's what I would try to find out. Another thing that we talked about on the communal cremains is try to get an exact location for that, if that's something that you're concerned about. I think on our website we we have the GPS coordinates of where our garden is, so you could Google it and Google Maps and see right where it's at. And we already talked about receiving back too much cremains. That's why I went through those pets that we just recently cremated and gave you an example of how many cremains you should get back. I would imagine there's probably some crematories out there that would do something like a communal and then give everybody some cremains back. Matter of fact, being in the business for 15 years, have had people ask me that, can you just do a communal and I'll just take some of the cremains back? And I said, well, no, we don't do that, and I can't do that for you, because the other people they think they're going to their cremains are going to the memorial garden, and I can't feel good about letting you take some of their cremains home, because they're all commingled and I wouldn't be able to decipher whose are whose. So there's probably some operations that do that, and I'm certain that there's some that in this country, definitely, I'm sure there's cremation facilities that do a communal cremation on everything and then divvy them out and sell them as privates or partitions or whatever, because that's where you get some of these super low ball prices that we're seeing. I've never how you've heard the saying where prices always go up, and just like taxes, they never come down. And this is one industry actually where the competition gets so greedy that the prices actually drop, and I've never seen anything like that before. And the one last red flag that I would want to touch on is, which is really, really pretty important, I think, is when you're checking out a place, look for a lot of logos on their website. If they got, BBB, the Better Business Bureau, or EPA for Environmental Protection Agency, or different industry associations on their website, maybe they'll have the logos on the bottom or whatever. That is the biggest bamboozle out there. People are getting fooled by that. Those logos mean nothing. That doesn't mean they're an ethical, upstanding operation. That is not the case at all. The Better Business Bureau called us. If we want to give them $40 a month, we can put their logo on our website. And I actually joked with them and said, well, you should pay me to put your logo on my website, not me pay you. But there's that, and then there's these just like with anything, any businesses out there, everybody has their association, industry associations that they belong to, whether you're a mechanic or whether you're a veterinarian. For instance, my wife belongs to some veterinarian associations. So they have those associations out there, but they don't guarantee that the crematory that is a member of them is doing anything correctly or ethically. I just saying, just don't be fooled by those logos. Don't take comfort like, oh wow, they got this logo, that logo, they must really be on the up and up. And I know for a fact that's not the case. Most of those places are pay to play, where you pay your fees every year, and then you're allowed to use their logo, and you get their magazine or whatever, and you're invited to their association meetings, that sort of thing. So don't be fooled by that.
I need to extend a big thank you to Mark for coming on today. I certainly wish that I had this information before I dealt with having my dog cremated. I wish that I had known about my options and the different things out there. As I mentioned, I had talked to my veterinarian, whom we trust and have worked with for decades now, and thankfully we had a really pleasant, very wonderful experience, and I actually recommend the crematory that we used now when I'm asked for recommendations for our friends and family in my local area. So thankfully it worked out well for me, but I definitely was uneducated, and I really appreciate Mark coming on and talking to us. If you guys have any questions, jump on our website. It's theoryofpets.com. You can send those questions to me. I will try and answer them if I can't, or if you have any questions specifically for Mark, please send them along as well. I will get those to him, and he can give you a response to those questions. And while you guys are on our website, there is a link over on the right-hand side. You'll see it to jump on and leave us a review on iTunes. It only takes a minute, and those reviews really help when I'm reaching out to experts like Mark, just to show them that you guys are out there and you're enjoying the podcast and you really want to hear more. So if you could take just a minute to jump on and leave a quick review, that would be great. I appreciate you guys listening, and I will be back with another hot topic next week.